how to know if you're actually a good candidate for VBAC. Have you ever been told that you are a good candidate, or maybe you're not a great candidate for VBAC? The truth is that label isn't as clear cut as it sounds. Let's break it down to what actually matters and what you might have been told or not told through this experience. Now, first of all, I want to let you know that policies vary between hospitals and providers. You may go to one hospital and you may be very supported in that hospital to have a VBAC. I've heard of women who have gone into certain hospitals and with certain providers, and they've been very supportive of a vaginal birth after cesarean. And then they've gone into another hospital or worked with another provider who was really not supportive. They were tolerant, but it came with a lot of, it would have to go like this, and we would have to induce you at this time, and baby wouldn't have to be over a certain amount of weight, and we would need to do that. That is usually tolerant. That is not very supportive of the vaginal birth. It comes with many stipulations and many rules as to how you're allowed to give this VBAC a try. So often it's based on guidelines as well. So a lot of the time guidelines, I mean, I've looked at guidelines, I've read guidelines for my state and where I am, and I've taken those guidelines into the hospital, for example, and I've said, look, I have all your guidelines, and I've been laughed at by obstetricians who have said, they're just guidelines. We just do use them loosely. And so other people would use them as like a religious Bible and be very strict with following those guidelines. But essentially they are just guidelines. And so the way that somebody looks at them and wants to use them as a guide is dependent on the person's experience, their personality, and their comfortability as well. So it's really interesting how so many different providers can work so differently. And if you're in a country like Australia, New Zealand, or the UK, you may find that you've got a very big difference between the private sector, whether you go with a private obstetrician or a private midwife, versus in the public system as well. And if you're in America and you are in the private system, then you will find that certain hospitals and certain providers within the system will offer you different things. If you search high and low, you'll find a provider who's willing to support a woman who's had 3 C-sections or 2 C-sections, and you'll find providers that are not willing to support women who have had 2 C-sections to have a vaginal birth. And so there's a huge variance. It's not a black and white thing where we all agree that this is safe, this is not safe. It's really open to interpretation and finding the right team to support you, and also the right location as well. You're not a number and you're not a checkbox. So quite often these blanket rules of we only support VBAC after 1 cesarean, or we're not looking at you as an individual person. What I think is the optimal gold standard care is continuity of care, which means you have the same care provider with you throughout pregnancy who gets to know you, gets to understand you, really advocates and wants to support you through the process, but also sees you as an individual, because the more that we know someone and the more that we get to build a relationship with them, the more we're invested. And again, it's different from care provider to care provider. If you're working with an obstetrician, they may see 15 to 20 women in a day. Whereas if you're working with a private midwife who works with women in home birth, they may only have availability to see 2 to 3 women in a day, or maybe 2 women in a day, because they're working in different ways, and they can only take on a certain amount of clients per month. Whereas a obstetrician may be able to see and actually attend 10 to 15, I don't know how many they attend, but maybe 15 births in the month, because they've got other things happening. They can duck in, duck out. Their midwives will be with them throughout the birth, so they're only coming right at the very end. And so there's so many different variables and things to consider when we're looking at those things. Now, the common reasons why women are told no often is because they might have a big baby. They had a big baby last time. And big is subjective as well, because lots of women get told their babies are big and they might be 3.8 kilos, which is a nice, healthy baby, right? But actually, the average size baby is, for a male around term, is 3.7 kilos. So that's not exactly huge. That's just a little bit bigger than the average. But the World Health Organization actually doesn't consider big or macrosomnia anything, usually what they term that is over 4.5 kilos. And so a lot of women are being told that their baby wouldn't have been born vaginally, that their pelvis was too small because of a big baby, and their baby came out at 4 kilos, 4.1 kilos. I've actually interviewed and worked with women who have had big babies. I myself had a big baby vaginally, a 4.5 kilo baby, and I'm only 5'1". So that's quite small in status. A lot of Asian women are often told that they won't be able to birth big babies because they're small. And I'm the tallest woman in my lineage. So, and I've birthed this humongous baby. And my nanny 60 years ago birthed 9 and 10 pound babies, and she's much shorter than me, but my grandfather is a very tall man, and she had all vaginal births. And so women have been doing this throughout time. It's just now that we put a label on it and we say, oh, there's a big baby. This is the reason why. So most of the time it's not a reason for a C-section, but it's often the reason why we're told that we have a C-section. We often get this slap. I've had this as well. I've had a lot of different reasons. I've had 2 C-sections, both of them not needed. Very challenging to go through and have C-sections when you don't need them, and you've been told different reasons for those. Failure to progress was one of those reasons as well. And so when we really look at failure to progress, in my case, I was failure to progress. I had an induction and it didn't work, and I never went into labor, and that was called a failure to progress. I also had a planned VBAC and went into hospital, and I was a failure to progress within 12 hours. And I just don't think that that's a long enough time for a woman to allow birth to unfold, when we know that birth can take up to 24 to 48 hours for the first time that we go into labor. It's the first time our bodies have done this. And so everything's opening up for the very first time. We need space and support to allow the process. And if we're constantly being checked and looked at, often we're not getting that space to allow the process to unfold. You may have had more than one C-section like me, and you're told that they won't support you to have a C-section. Unfortunately, this is a common thing that I hear from women, although over the years, I've been working in this space for a number of years now. Over the years, I have seen more and more women go on to achieve their C-section after multiple births. I've even interviewed a woman on my podcast who had a vaginal birth after 7 C-sections, a vaginal birth after 4 C-sections, a vaginal birth after 3 C-sections, and I myself have had a vaginal birth after 2 C-sections. I just find it astounding. I think, there's a lot to learn from stories from women who have had multiple C-sections, and, finding out what their secret recipe was. Because you really want to be looking at women who have had these births and figuring out what it is that they did in that experience that maybe didn't go down in your last experience as well. A scar type. So as I mentioned, there's special scars. Having multiple puts you at a little bit higher risk, but the higher risk is nowhere near what a lot of women get told. And often they get told, you're going to have a dead baby, you're going to rupture, do you want to rupture, do you want to be selfish? All of these things, but they're not actually provided the evidence so they can make informed choices. And that is not evidence-based practice. It's not informed consent. In many countries, that's not even legal to practice in that way. And it's really sad that women are not being provided the full support to make informed choices. So these are so common. I hear them from women all the time, but they're not always deal breakers. Most of the time, there's ways to maneuver around them. And it's about getting the right support, getting in the best birthplace where you're supported, and to know how tolerant these supporters are and providers are as well. So what actually matters more is understanding why your previous C-section happened, unpacking and understanding why that happened. What were the steps that led to that C-section? Whether that situation is likely to happen again. Because if you make the same choices the next time, it's likely that those things will play out exactly the same. But if you make different choices, you can give yourself a much higher chance at succeeding and having that vaginal birth. But we can't continue repeating, going to the same person, going to the same hospital, making the same choices, because if you continue to do the same things, you're likely to have the same outcome. Thinking about your overall health and your pregnancy, of if you're a healthy woman, your baby's healthy, making sure that you're eating right, that you don't have to be fully physically active. I get out in the pool and I just float around and move my limbs and things like that. I'm not very active when I'm in labor because I get HD, I get very tired. But being able to move a little bit and get out in the sun and look after your mental health and eating nutritious foods and having community support all helps, and having a really great provider who's lifting you up, not lifting you down, all helps to make you feeling optimal, helping you grow this beautiful baby without anxiety, without fear, and without worry as well. You'll notice that if your care provider is constantly bringing fear-induced topics to the conversation, that you might be feeling a lot of anxiety about that, and you might be coming home fearful, and that's not really conducive to your plan of having a vaginal birth. Risk is not black and white. So VBAC is not safe versus unsafe. It's about informed choice. And so what I mean by that is vaginal birth comes with a risk, right? After cesarean. So does having a C-section. But often we're only told that VBAC has a risk. We're often not told about the risks of C-section. And so it's really important to understand the risks on both sides so that you can weigh it up and you can understand what your choices are and what the best choice for you is, and go in there feeling confident, knowing that you're making the right choices for you. And you deserve to understand all of those risks as well. So I always encourage my clients to ask their care providers, okay, well, please provide me with the benefits and the risks of that pathway, and please provide me with the benefits and risks of this pathway as well. Print out all the evidence, ask them to print out the evidence and talk you through those things. And also take that home and sit with that and think about that, and think, a lot of the time when I went into the hospital system, I asked them to print out the policies, the evidence, what they were talking about. And when I got down to the crux of it, a lot of it was hospital staffing issues. It wasn't actually about me or what was best for my baby. It was actually we want to make sure that we have the right staff that are here. So we want to manage your labor and we want to manage you. So that's why we're recommending an induction, or that's why we're recommending a C-section. But that's not good enough for me. I don't want to have a C-section just to resolve staffing issues. So for me, it was safer and better to find a hospital and a team that had qualified staff who were able to support me for the type of birth that I wanted to have. The missing piece. So many women are making decisions with incomplete information. It's really hard to be informed if you don't have the full picture. I've gone over some of it here. There's so much more that we can discuss, and there's so much more nuance to understand. It's so political. Unfortunately, there's a lot to understand when it comes to birth. Confidence comes from understanding options. So, when you're looking at someone else to say, please tell me what to do, that is not the space that we want you to be in. We want you to understand why you're making those choices and have confidence in those choices and taking the responsibility of those choices on. Because no matter what you choose, if you choose to accept your healthcare provider's opinion and medical advice, that is still a choice that you're making, and you still need to live with the outcomes of those choices. And when you know more, you can choose what feels right for you. Knowledge is power, 100%. Look, it's harder to go down the path of knowledge, 100%. It's the more you learn, it's whoa, this whole world's expanding and exploring. But knowledge is power, and why wouldn't you want to step into this experience knowing everything you can and giving yourself the best chance at being able to achieve a vaginal birth this time? Birth is such a fleeting experience. You only get a certain number of opportunities to go through this, and you really want to give yourself the best chance to have an empowering, powerful experience that at the end of the day that I gave this all my best shot, and no matter what happens, you have done the very best to set yourself up to achieve this. Because quite frankly, half-assing something, sure, sometimes people escape through. I mean, I did that in school, right? Half-assed, didn't do my assignments on time. I'm a C grade student, right? But when it comes to birth, you really need to be an A. You need to be an A gamer. You really need to bring your game because the game is hard. The game of birth, there's a lot to have to think about. But don't worry, I've got steps that are easy to understand to go through so you can play the game of birth and you can play it right because I have learned the hard way. I've gone through the hard way of two C-sections. I've heard hundreds and hundreds of women's birth stories after C-sections. I've learned so much. You can use all the knowledge and experience that I've gained over the years, having to do all the hard yards, and I can compact and give you that information really simply, which is so helpful. If you want help figuring out your specific situation, come and join us inside the VBAC Village. I'll walk you through this really simply and easily and in a supportive way. It's just $9 and I'd love to support you there. I look forward to bringing new videos soon and have a great day.